Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, news, you name it. We talk about it if it impacts you as a listener. And I see you're wearing your Arts Goggle t-shirts.
Yes, it's the volunteer t-shirt. It says crew on the back because I volunteered yesterday.
You only get that one from hard work. You can't buy it.
That's right. You cannot buy this shirt. I volunteered to help with setup at Arts Goggle yesterday after having done the wrap-up cleanup crew for the 2 years before, because I thought maybe doing that early morning would be less of a beatdown than wrapping up at the end of the day. It's a long day regardless, but worth it 100%.
It's truly the best day of the year, in my opinion. Like one of my favorite Fort Worth weekends is Arts Goggle.
Well, the funny thing is that when you're a volunteer, you have a radio, and there's people talking on the radio, and somebody, and I'm going to have to track down who it was. I think it was somebody on the Near South Side team, would say at opportune moments throughout the whole time, today is going to be the best day of your life. So if there was some kind of tense thing being handled, or somebody was worried about an artist getting to the proper location, this person would chime in with, today is going to be the best day of your life, or something to that effect. And it was lovely.
Yeah,
there was a lot of affirmation and positive feedback. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it looked like it ran well. So welcome to the 817 podcast, where we talk about Fort Worth. We do 3 short stories, 1 big story, and wins and losses. We today have a guest, Wesley Gentle, Executive Director of Arts Fort Worth. He's coming here to talk about their impact study, the impact of art on Fort Worth specifically. Brings out some great data, but then also just great qualitative stories and experiences as an artist himself. That's the big story. We're going to dive into the first 3 short stories. And can you lead us into short story 1?
Our short story number 1 is a Fort Worth Report article titled, After Deadly Shooting, Fort Worth to Invest More in West 7th Safety, Here's What Could Change. And the reason I find this personally interesting is that, representing this area when I was on the council, this has been something that's been discussed for a long time since the proliferation of bars and some of the activities that are unintended consequences of what was allowed to develop there over the years. And so we had some task forces that got together to bring together community members to talk about how we might make things better in the past. And I think some of those things are being revisited. And this is a pretty lengthy article, so it kind of is a struggle to make it a short story. So I encourage folks to go and read the entire thing. But I think that the overall is that they are proposing some things that will be beneficial to the area. And I think that they're at the outset, Mayor Parker indicates that, just bringing in more police and policing is not going to be a solution to the systematic problems that exist in the area. And so I think that some of the changes that they're proposing will alleviate the need for some of that public safety. But they basically indicate that about 10,000 people fill Fort Worth's West 7th Bar District on a cool October evening, and that's maybe even slower than some Saturdays that they've had in past months, probably because of some of the incidences that have happened down there. But officers, confiscate guns and arrest people for DUIs and are constantly vigilant in this 12-block area. And they're investigating and making their presence known. The article goes into a lot of the data about things that have been, guns that have been seized and recovery of stolen vehicles and the patrolling that they do, and kind of the way that they break it down in an hour by hour of what happens on West 7th. The part that's more interesting to me is the part where they start talking about some of the solutions that they're going to be looking at. Both Mayor Parker and Assistant City Manager Fernando Costa, who has been involved in these conversations for quite some time, are working with partnering with business owners and other folks in the area to look at some policy changes that would address some of these things and deter some of the negative activity. It talks about different entertainment districts in the city, and it goes into some of the entertainment districts in other cities and things that they've done, specifically Deep Ellum in Dallas. And they have 6 new programs that they're looking at that include changes in zoning, um, committing to working with organizations that are down there, and the creation of a public improvement district, which that is something that we've talked about for a long time in that area. But it takes the commitment and agreement of the majority of the business owners in the area, but it seems that that is something that now exists, with Crockett Row being one of the major property owners in that area under new management. I think that new management has recently agreed to champion creating that district. So that's a huge shift from previous years when we were discussing doing those kind of things.
It's interesting how, like, looking at the graph here, I mean, West 7th gets as much crime reports based off this graph on the article as the stockyards, but I would imagine the stockyards gets oodles and noodles more visitors.
Yeah, I think that's true. The stockyards has a ton more people coming.
But yet, when you look at this graph, their crime reports and assaults are equal. So it's kind of shown why this kind of like college scene, cheap drinks all in one place. I mean, it does have a big impact on safety. When you're talking about that West 7th competes with stockyards on crime and assaults, when stockyards is one of the most touted tourist spots in Texas, and the amount of numbers they get. So that's really interesting.
I think there is a lot of drinking that occurs in the West 7th area. Yeah. I know that the taxes brought in by the alcohol sales is very, very high, which makes that having those large bars there, selling that much alcohol, a big profit generator. So I think that's part of the reason why there's been some hesitancy and resistance on the folks that are making those dollars from that revenue to scale that back. But I think that everybody understands at this point that something needs to happen, because there's just been, the mixing of weapons with alcohol is not a good mix, and it becoming a place where maybe more young people are going to drink, I think has caused this to happen. But I think that this public improvement district idea is a great idea. The West 7th Bar Association leadership, I think, is seeing the benefit of partnering in this regard, whereas in the past there have been some bar owners that were not willing to partner with the city on some of the planning ideas. I know back when they made some improvements, one of the ideas was to make the area pedestrian. And when you read the description of how many people are spilling out onto the streets walking at the end of the night and even during the night, that was an idea that I thought would be a benefit. There was some concern about access to parking garages for Crockett Row, but I think all of those things can be worked out. And the police actually turn it into kind of roping off areas. And, some of the ideas are having places where you go meet your Uber and Lyft, because if you're drinking, you shouldn't be driving. So you should be availing yourself of Uber and Lyft and maybe public transportation. But having all those Ubers and Lyfts come into a concentrated area leads to those congestion points that then can lead to problems. And so I think those are all things that they're looking at. Years ago, when I went to a National League of Cities, I think it was a National League of Cities convention, they talked about having what was called a night mayor. So a mayor of a city that's basically in charge of things that happen at night. And that would be a concentration on your entertainment districts. And that was an idea that I brought back to the city from that conference. And it was either a planning conference or the National League of Cities. And I think we did discuss it and thought that it was a good idea, but and it's not an elected role. It's kind of just a concentration that a city staff person would put on, or someone who manages a public improvement district. So now that they're interested in creating a public improvement district, that could be. But I think that it's also good that they're looking at entertainment districts across the city, because they don't want to just try to fix the problem here and have it move to another location. Mm-hmm. So this article goes into a lot of detail about how they're going to be studying all of the entertainment districts and making sure that we're not just moving this from one location to another.
Yes, a great article by Rachel Barrett. So we're going to go ahead and move into the second story.
So the second story, I think we've got 3 Fort Worth Report stories in a row here, but this is a combination of 2 articles that we're looking at. One, a Fort Worth Report article titled "More Than Half of Renters in Fort Worth Are Cost Burdened, New Census Data Shows," and the other article that's related is "Fort Worth Adopts Affordable Housing Plan After Initial Pushback from Some Homeowners." So I think the first article points out the problem, and the second article points out some of the solutions. So we wanted people to be aware of both of those. The article talking about half of renters in Fort Worth are cost burden goes into, people who are not making incomes enough to not pay 30% or more of their income towards their housing costs, which the rule of thumb is to try to not be spending more than 30% of your income on your housing costs. But what has happened in Fort Worth is rents have gone up and salaries and incomes have not. And the growth that has happened in Fort Worth has more people needing housing, and the housing itself has not kept up with that growth. So the building of affordable housing, the building of rental, and for sale housing has not kept up with the demand. And so if you got more people willing to buy stuff and pay rents, then those units available, then you're going to have those costs rise as well. So it goes into the details of an individual who lives in downtown who works for the Fort Worth ISD, making a very modest salary and, having to pay rent and basically having to make decisions about which bills to pay and which bills to leave unpaid. And this is definitely a struggle. And this actually reminded me of something that I hadn't even brought to your attention. I know that the Tarrant County Homeless Coalition and Catholic Charities is doing an event. It's like an immersion in what it's like to live in poverty. And you literally are given, a situation and challenges arise. And so I think it's to open the eyes of folks who don't necessarily live that every day to what a struggle it is, so that hopefully that would lead to more empathy and understanding of folks who might then be in favor of supporting affordable housing projects going forward. But I'll get you the date on when that's happening because they sent that to me just the other day, and I think it would be a good thing for folks to participate in. But getting back to the article, not all cost burden renters feel the equal pressure. Amy Conley, who's an assistant director with Fort Worth Neighborhood Services, talks about how these census numbers are, kind of broad in nature, and that they, as a department in the city, drill down into like what folks are experiencing specifically in Fort Worth, and that there are some folks who choose to spend a larger percentage of their income on rent because they just want to live in a place that, is a desirable place that maybe is charging those higher rents. But then home ownership is kind of on the ropes as well, as the article points out, that we used to say all the time that it was cheaper to own a house than to rent, but that's quickly becoming not the case. And this kind of ties into what my win is going to be, so I'll leave that for later. But I talk about an article where I contributed to the Fort Worth Report of where I live, and the cost of housing's back when I bought a house versus the cost of houses now. But this article ends with a reference to Fort Worth's response, that in response to the growing affordability crisis, the city released its Neighborhood Conservation Plan and Housing Affordability Strategy, which lays out strategies to tackle the lack of affordable housing in the city over the next 5 years. And the article speaks to the fact that this study was postponed in its acceptance by the council to address some concerns that were brought up by some folks, which is leading to our second article, where also a Fort Worth Report article, that Fort Worth has adopted the affordable housing plan after initial pushback from some homeowners. The plan was unanimously adopted, and there was some strong opposition from some homeowners who previously delayed it, which, I'm all for having conversations to make sure that people are informed. I spoke at the city council at both of these meetings where it was initially postponed on the vote, and then again on last Tuesday when it was voted to move forward. But the plan basically identifies the fact that there are severely cost-burdened families across our city and in specific neighborhoods. And then it also laid out some recommendations on how to tackle and close the affordable housing gap. Both of the council meetings, folks who were residents and leaders in organizations that deal with the affordable housing crisis on a daily basis, spoke out for why there's a need to address this. And the plan itself has dozens of recommendations that a consultant that did the plan recommended, and we've talked about it on the pod before. But it was just one of those recommendations that led to a little bit of concern by some residents. And that was the discussion about accessory dwelling units. They're worried about increasing density with accessory dwelling units and what that would bring to a neighborhood. I think that, like I said, I'm all for people getting informed and having their questions answered. And the city was very careful in making sure that people understand that adopting this plan does not mean that every single recommendation will be carried out to fruition in the city. So some of the organizations that spoke at the meeting where they finally did adopt by resolution the study, they indicated that, we've done everything that we've been asked by the city, by the council, and by communities, and yet we still find ourselves up against a wall when it comes to affordability. This was the spokesperson from Habitat for Humanity. And so they're just asking for the council to come alongside them to do anything that they can, and this plan provides that opportunity. And then Fort Worth business owner and arts organizer Wesley Kirk, not to be confused with Wesley Gentle, which often happens, said that this vote will open the door for a variety of housing options, which will ensure that the city thrives. And there's a little bit of a misquote in this article because he described this as a small step and said that the city needs to take a bold leap or take bold action. And the article says that he said that this was a bold leap. And I think he's made some public comments about the fact that he was misquoted in this article. So the answer isn't to keep spreading out, which of course, I love that point of view. People are desperate to live near the urban core, and the answer isn't to leave it up to the market because the market has already failed us. The answer is to get smarter in how we do land use and how we make it easier to provide what people are looking for. And I think the thing that holds people back and makes them concerned about having more housing for people in the core of the city and then the neighborhoods that are around the core of the city typically comes down to congestion on roadways. Where will they park? And, kind of those concerns, those external impacts of bringing more people to a place. And I don't think that the solution is to not allow more people to come to that place and have that housing for them there. I think the solution is finding other ways for folks to get around so that we're not putting all that in single occupancy vehicles. This is a dead horse that people are going to get tired of me saying, but I think that we have infrastructure in our urban core. People want to live in our urban core and the neighborhoods surrounding the urban core.
Yeah.
And continuing to sprawl out is just going to cause those negative impacts of those roadways and the services, the money that we'll have to spend on providing those services in those far-flung areas will take away from the core. So these core neighborhoods are going to be damaged by that outcome as well.
Yeah, I think what I would love is like an economist coming on our pod or like some type of historian talking about property and the property in our country. Because it's just I think it's a macro issue with like how we portray property and how we set rates and how we create value
and what you can do with your property.
And all that. And
because neighborhoods evolve and change. I mean, there's an organization called Strong Towns that talks about how if you're not changing, then you're dying. And they look at neighborhoods and, neighborhoods like Fairmount have been denser in the past than they are now, because often people will come in and take a structure that used to have 2 or 4 units in it and turn it into a single family home. Mm-hmm. And so it removes density and it removes units that were there in the past. And there exist accessory dwelling units, ADUs, in the city of Fort Worth right now. In the past, in some of those larger, wealthier neighborhoods, those ADUs were used for staff that helped work in those homes. Nowadays, people are using those to have, intergenerational living where family members live in a structure on the same property as the single family home so that you can have close proximity to your loved ones or provide support for a loved one that needs it, either taking care of young children or taking care of people as they age. These are all options, and it doesn't always need to be stopped because people are worried that it's going to cause more people to live in an area, and that is going to be a negative thing. I think more places for people to live is a positive thing.
Yeah. Well, we got to go on to our third story where any type of impact in this kind of area comes from, and that is voting in elections. I don't think there's any besides lowering property taxes. Is probably the only thing in this upcoming election that's available. But we just wanted to note that November 7th is the election, and the third article here is really just a highlight. A solid article by I found this off the Star Telegram. It says, question mark, learn what Texas constitutional amendments on November 7th election ballot actually mean. And it's just a nice, healthy article that tells you basically what's it going to say on the ballot, but then in layman's terms, what does it actually mean? And so when you go vote, this to me is important because it allows you to already, I would just have like a note card or just some type of understanding of it beforehand, because if you're going to go in there to vote and then you have to process a lot of this stuff, and it's going to be difficult to do so. I still, even in layman's terms, think like, what's the point of voting on this? What does it actually change? And you kind of brought that up as well.
Yeah, the thought that I had was I would like to know what the intent was. So, I mean, that would require going back to the legislature and maybe listening to them in their committee meetings and in the discussions about this, because sometimes I'm wondering, like, why are we doing this? And the intent will help inform what it is that they actually expect it to do. So if somebody would break down, language on the ballot, what it really means, a few more words, descriptor words, and who proposed it and what the intent was, I think I would find that helpful.
That sounds really awesome.
Yeah, I might nerd out a little bit more about voting than most people do.
But no, I wonder if there's a Texas Tribune article around that space that maybe we can find. But we're really not going to dive too much into this story. I mean, it's 14 propositions, so it would take us a while to go through each of them. But that's the third short story, just to remind you about the election coming up, participating, really questioning why are we trying to amend some parts of our Constitution. We know the state of our state politics today. So being mindful still and showing up to vote is important. But we're going to go ahead and move into our big story, which is an interview with Wesley Gentle. He is the executive director of Arts Fort Worth. He's a TCU grad. He spent time in the Fort Worth Orchestra, and we're really excited to have him on the podcast to talk about their Impact Report, their 6th edition of their Impact Report, which really is them showcasing the value of arts in the city of Fort Worth, which you have to do because you always are we're having to promote and showing the value of arts in our city, unfortunately. So we're glad that we have organizations like his doing this work so we can continue to fund important people, providing inspiration, hope, and just experiences that makes us happy to be a part of Fort Worth. So here is Wesley Gentle.
My Fort Worth story. Well, you mentioned TCU, my alma mater. That's what brought me to Fort Worth first. So I grew up in Central Florida, Orlando area, Maitland, and, had some opportunities to stay in Florida for school, but really wanted to see something outside of the swamp. Sorry, Florida, I love you. And had the opportunity to check out TCU, a couple other places, and really fell in love with it pretty quickly. Luckily, they were able to hook me up with a little bit of a scholarship, which made the choice even easier. And after 4 years, got to know Fort Worth a little bit. Definitely had a great time there. And went off to Boston, as you described. That's where I got my master's. But kind of felt the pull to come back to Texas. Lived up in the Northeast for a while, working as an opera singer, traveling around. And as I was deciding what I wanted to do, because the suitcase lifestyle, moving around all the time wasn't quite for me, I just felt that pull to come back to a place like Fort Worth and, kind of make that home. And had the opportunity, thanks to Fort Worth Opera. I was singing actually 2 small roles with Fort Worth Opera, and was at dinner with the development director at the time. And she said, hey, we got an opening in development. sounds like something you might be interested in. And I was like, absolutely. So the rest is kind of history. I've been here ever since, learning the arts landscape and trying to make a small difference.
A small difference. So humble.
Oh.
We are very lucky that you made that decision and that choice to come back here. So you definitely are making more than a small difference.
Well, thanks, Ann. That means so much coming from you, so I don't even know if I can unpack that at the beginning of a podcast.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
I will say that our paths have crossed numerous times in various roles. I think I knew you before you were doing Arts Fort Worth, but then coming into that role, I was still on council.
I think so.
So we
Yeah.
overlapped a little bit there, talking about policies that the city makes and funding that the city provides and the impact that that organization has.
So give us like what is Arts Fort Worth, like to the random person who probably doesn't even know that we have this kind of involvement with art in our city.
Yeah.
And then like what is kind of like, you know, the things that you think the average person just needs to know about the work you guys do.
For sure. Yeah, so Arts Fort Worth, if we rewind the clocks back to 1963, we were founded by Ruth Carter Stevenson, daughter of Amon Carter, who, you know, is pretty well known in this community. I think you go around, you see his name on a few buildings. But she and some others in the community wanted to pick up on kind of a trend that was going around the nation, which was this federated giving, this let's pull our resources together, support the arts. And for decades, that's kind of what we did. The Arts Council of Fort Worth and Tarrant County, we pulled resources together, mostly made grants to the big performing arts groups, and they were able to kind of grow and flourish, partially thanks to that support. But in the 90s, our organization started shifting and looking a little more at cultural equity and how we can support our community in a more, not only a broader sense, but also in a way that really takes these great resources and these amenities and these cultural opportunities we have and get them to our neighborhoods and to parts of Fort Worth that maybe weren't experiencing them. And I think that is really more in the DNA now of what Arts Fort Worth is. So we rebranded as Arts Fort Worth about 2 or 3 years ago. And really for the past 20 years, we've been acting as sort of a kind of a cultural department, so to speak. So a lot of cities have an arts and cultural affairs department or some place where they house their arts policy and arts funding. The city of Fort Worth doesn't do that, so they contract with us on an annual basis to manage their public art program, so large-scale public works, artworks, to manage the Fort Worth Community Arts Center, which has 2 theaters, 7 galleries. It's got multiple arts nonprofit tenants and studio spaces and classroom spaces. And then we also administer grants on behalf of the city of Fort Worth. So those are grants for the large performing arts institutions, visual arts institutions, but also smaller groups, grassroots groups, pretty much anyone who's right now in a nonprofit configuration doing great work that raises the bar for the arts and gets the arts to different parts of our community. So in a nutshell, I think the way I kind of see Arts Fort Worth is it's an organization that's trying to make sure everyone in Fort Worth can experience the arts and can create art if they, want to do that.
It's a big job.
Yeah.
A big job that needs a lot of support from all factors. So I think that most recently, I think people have been talking about the future of the Community Arts Center.
Yeah.
And that's been your home and the home of some great work that's been going on and reaching out into the community. And I had the opportunity to serve on that task force, which made me learn things that I didn't even know. So I think that it was, on the positive side, a good opportunity to get more of the word out, because you meet people in the community that are like, oh, that building in the Will Rogers complex, I never knew what went on in there.
Yeah.
So I think that the more we can get the word out of the work that's going on, because as you said, it's shifted from just that more focus on large institutions to that equity piece, which I think you all are doing an excellent job of. You see the most diverse, different shows with different artists and different mediums, performance and visual and all of those things at the Community Arts Center that I think you don't see in other even huge institutions that have massive amounts of backing.
Yeah. Give me like what makes Art Fort Worth unique to compared to other cities, and what like measurements or things are you tracking to say, man, we're doing a really good job at this. We need to get better at this when we compare to other cities.
So Arts Fort Worth is a little bit different from a lot of other cities in the sense, as I described before, most cities have a city department or even just a liaison in the mayor's office or something baked into the city that does kind of what we do or some piece of what we do. There's a few exceptions. Houston has the Houston Arts Alliance, which is similar to us, although funded, probably at a factor of 5 times what we're seeing here. But I think to answer your question about what we're tracking, historically we've been tracking some pretty basic things, just attendance at arts-supported or grant-supported activities for arts organizations, attendance at the Community Arts Center, number of pieces put into which parts of Fort Worth for the public art program. So it's been, pretty high-level data that we've been collecting. We've been partnering with other agencies to get deeper into what the actual impact of the arts are from a economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, even starting to dip our toes into the health and wellness kind of impact of the arts in our community. And then, I'd mentioned cultural equity. One thing we're not doing a lot of, but we're really starting to explore how we can do better, is to figure out what the metrics are that better tell us how our resources are getting distributed throughout our community, especially to where maybe they haven't been distributed before, and what is the impact, what is the, how's the needle move when that happens. So there's a lot left to be explored and discovered, and that's a big piece of our next step as we kind of take this, first step into the next 60 years of our organization. That's a lot of what we're talking about internally and starting to work with some of our partners to figure out what do we need to be tracking better and what do we need to be measuring ourselves against, really just in Fort Worth, regardless of what other people are doing around the country, because I think that's really what's going to help us make better decisions about what we can do with, frankly, very limited resources.
Yeah.
I think that falls into an aspect of what the city of Fort Worth has done in a number of areas that I personally think need to have a little bit more support. Public transportation being one that I constantly bring up, and the arts, because in the time that I was serving on the council, you guys were bringing us studies that showed the return on investment and the economic impact that the arts bring to our community. And I know that you've gotten a more recent update to all of that. I would always share it. I'm convinced. You don't need to convince me. There's some other folks. And I think that city really is at a bit of a tipping point right now where there are more folks that have kind of gotten that information and received that data and realized that not only does it have these anecdotal stories that we heard a lot of, especially dipping into that health and wellness piece that you brought up. I mean, I know many of the stories that were brought forward in the conversation about what people had gotten out of the Community Arts Center individually as artists were some very impactful stories of individuals who were struggling with anxiety and depression, and that being able to have a place where they could do the arts and have that community that they found there of support was something that they literally described as saving their lives. Yeah. So, those things are very impactful to me and many others as to why this work is so important. But I think that data piece of how there's an economic return speaks to folks that maybe need a different reason for supporting things. They want to make sure that the dollars in produce dollars out. And I think that some of the reports that you guys have done over the years show that. So that's another thing that I think you track as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the study that specifically an economic impact study that we've taken to council in the past and others around the community. We are hot off the presses with the data for 2022 and a little bit into 2023. So we're really proud to have an update to that study that we've been, frankly, using for almost a decade now, because we had intended to update it in 2020, and y'all know what happened then. Yeah. And really the story for what happened to the arts specifically with the pandemic is, I think, even more than what people expect or realize. There was a Johns Hopkins study that I think in 2021 they were tracking, basically how many jobs were lost in any industry. Nonprofits, it was, a little under 10% decrease in jobs. And then when you look at arts nonprofits, it was actually kind of 12.5%. So it was like a 3 times increase from, for-profit industries, and then within the nonprofit, it was still a big bump up. And a lot of that's still recovering. I mean, we're looking at data now that shows us, the arts are still trying to come back in some ways. Fortunately, there's been great growth and great return. and great exploration of what needed to change before the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of positive things that we're finding from that time period. But the data is interesting. I mean, the data is telling us some of what we've seen in recent times, but also it's telling us a lot of things about just general impact of what happens with our arts industry. And I think that is a big thing is people, they think about the feel-good piece, right? And those feel-good pieces are amazing, transformational, lives saved, no exaggeration. And myself, I'm an artist myself. I struggle with depression and anxiety through middle school, high school, and I really credit my work as an artist, my practice, as something that helped me work through those things. But when we actually get into the industry side of things, we see a real measurable impact. The input-output is, pretty clear. And one study that we use all the time is this Arts and Economic Prosperity Study. So AEP is the short abbreviation that I'll probably start throwing around, and I should know better than to use abbreviations. But
well, if you explain them up front, it makes it a little easier. That planners do that too, so
Yeah.
that's definitely helpful to the layman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, call me out if I start, using letters without any explanation. But yeah, the AEP study we do in partnership with Americans for the Arts, which is a national advocacy body, and they've been doing the study for since '94, I think. And Fort Worth jumped on board in 2010. So I think this is our third round. It comes out about every 5 years, pandemics notwithstanding. And with that, it's really measuring the direct expenditures of nonprofit arts groups. So it's a very specific sort of niche study. We do see bigger sort of analysis coming from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, at the federal level, that really takes the for-profit arts industry and culture industry, the not-for-profit, and even the individual gig workers. And with that, we see amazing impact. I mean, it's about $16 billion annual impact of the arts, which puts us ahead of construction and things like that. However, there's some pretty major outliers. You've got Broadway, you've got Hollywood, right, that have tremendous export and import potential there. And the individual piece is a really substantial one, too. So we do this study specifically looking at the nonprofit space because that's where a lot of municipal and statewide arts funding goes, is directly to these arts nonprofits, and we want to see what the ROI is, the return on investment is. So this past study yielded, just of the participants, $507,059,667 in direct expenditures from arts and culture nonprofits in the city of Fort Worth. So $500 million directly spent. And this is just tracking participants in the program. So we had, I think, 76 respondents. We solicited about 260 respondents. So it was a lower percentage of participation. It was about, 29, 30% participation. However, a lot of those groups, frankly, may not have even existed by the time we reached out due to the pandemic. So what we know is it's a potential that this is a huge undercount, actually. Mm-hmm. This $500 million could be, a couple million more, a couple $100 million more. We're not sure. It's a very conservative study, and it's really just measuring direct output, right? So you talk about input-output. We use the IMPLAN, IMPLAN, what's the term? Kind of model building system. It's used by Texas Department of Transportation, other major, municipalities and federal groups around the country. And essentially what we get here is a very, very reliable, very direct measurement of what's happening with nonprofit groups. And from there, we're able to extrapolate how many jobs these groups are creating in our community. This past year is about 7,000 jobs. We're able to track what sort of tax revenue is coming back to our governments.
What the city's making
Exactly. You think nonprofit, you think, they're not, paying their fair share. Well, no, we're paying $10.8 million to city and county. Let's see, $9 million to state, and $55.7 million to the feds. So that's a lot going back to these institutions that are, in turn investing a small amount of money in these groups. And then, beyond that, we can also see what sort of activity is happening at the attendance level for these programs. So people going to the museum, people going to festivals like Arts Goggle that we all just experienced recently.
Yeah, we were talking about how do you measure how many people go to something like that? And
Yeah.
I was telling EJ, they sometimes take aerial photographs and then they can count like an area and then multiply it by the entire block length or whatever and get kind of estimates. And there were a lot of people there yesterday.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, tens of thousands of people. So, yeah, we can do aerial photography. They have like artificial intelligence, cell phone tracking now. And it's really amazing and creepy how well we can determine how many people show up at these things.
Yeah.
And the methodology we primarily use for this study is audience intercept surveys. So we would have a team of people at events all over Fort Worth for over a year, just asking people to fill out information, confidential.
I filled out a few of those
Okay.
at some events. Yeah,
Nice.
asking like how you plan to come to that event, if you spent any money getting yourself ready, buying clothing to go to that event,
Yeah.
if you ate out and how many people you brought with you, if there were people from out of town in your group, a lot of detail. So I filled that out, I think at least 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
At different events, not
Oh, no,
not
yeah.
all at one event, not trying to tweak the numbers or anything.
Well, and the truth is it wouldn't really change anything if you filled it out 3 times at one event. It'd be kind of the same, data point, and I think they'd probably throw it out, actually. So,
There you go.
but yeah, going to multiple events, of course, you have a different experience at each one, and
Yeah.
that helps us kind of average what's happening there. And so we did get over 900 respondents to all these different intercept surveys that we did, which was over the sample size we were shooting for, was about 800 that we were aiming for. And what we found there is, to your point, about a quarter of anyone going to these things is coming from outside of our area. They're coming up from outside of Tarrant County. And 51% of the people who are at these things, we ask specific questions, not just what are you spending, but why are you here? What would you do otherwise if this
Yeah.
wasn't in Fort Worth, where you're at right now? 51% of people said, hey, I would go somewhere else, right? I would go to Arts Goggle in Dallas if it was in Dallas and wasn't in Fort Worth.
See, I said I would go to something else in Fort Worth. I think most of my answers were I'd try to find something else in Fort Worth to do.
Well, not everyone's Anzaid, unfortunately.
Yeah. When you look at arts, what part of art are we looking at here? Like, we have film, Texas Film Group. We have the Visit Fort Worth, who does a lot of different stuff. It's kind of debatable. It's arts, so it's like, but how do you guys position what you're tracking?
Yeah, no, we talk pretty broadly about it.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, I think one shorthand way of describing arts is anything that's primarily expressive, right? So even if it has other benefits, its main reason for existing is to express. But really the study expanded this year quite a bit to not just look at arts, but also to look at things that describe themselves as cultural and maybe don't focus on the arts in the same way that we traditionally have. And with that, too, there was a really intentional approach to equity and looking at BIPOC or Alana, type of serving organizations or organizations that are led and self-identify that way. And we, were tasked by Americans for the Arts, and we made it our own effort as well to gather 25% of our sample from these groups. And there were some pretty interesting findings there, actually. We, at the national level, are seeing that regardless of how the event identified or the audience identified, the economic output was roughly the same thing. And I think some people, maybe not fairly, but some people may assume that there's a difference in spending power or, what may be happening economically at these different types, well, the same types of events, but different audiences. And the reality is it's the same. The other reality is there was a 2019 study that showed 71%, I think, of arts funding for these type of organizations are going to historically European traditions, and that probably shouldn't be a surprise, right? So, I think it was 71% of funding is going to 15% of organizations. So I think there's something to unpack there, right? That, we're seeing very similar output economically, but very different input economically there, which I know wasn't your question. That just kind of got me off on a tangent. But really that's part of what this study was doing, was trying to look more broadly than we have in the past at what arts are, what culture is, and even what a nonprofit is. So some of the groups that are responding and some of the organizational activities that we participated in were not from nonprofits in the traditional sense. They weren't 501c3 incorporated nonprofits. They were grassroots community groups. They were, a collective of people putting something on. And those were allowed in this study because we see that they're doing the work that nonprofits do, and they're having the same impact economically.
Yeah, and getting that nonprofit status is not an easy thing.
No.
So that's a gatekeeping thing that would make it difficult for some groups to do it. So that's a really good broadening of the contacts that you're making in order to make sure that that's part of the documentation.
But like Boys to Men at Dickies Arena is just like we're like not even discussing that as art in this whole
not
stuff.
in this study.
Yeah, which I'm just saying because it could be. I'm trying to make the number bigger. That's all I'm trying.
For
You know,
sure.
that's all.
Yeah.
You know, just thinking about how it all works. Okay.
Yeah, but those the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis numbers I was talking about, that's square where that would fit in. Mhm.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, so let's like you talked about other cities having it within the city. Do you like it that we have it this way, or do you? What's your kind of like?
I gotta watch myself here.
Yeah. Or if that is not the question to ask you, it's how do you see your work and the people you represented
Better served
or
best
navigate
served.
Yeah.
Best served.
navigate the city of Fort Worth, and how you see art is perceived in Fort Worth, and through that lens, because obviously there's always more funding needed for the arts. That's one of the things that doesn't get the love that it should always. There's a bunch of other competing options going on. So, you know, how do you feel like we need to help Fort Worth see the value and the perception of art in our city to best support you?
You know, that first part of the question, is this the best way to do it? There's definitely benefits to having a nonprofit kind of take on a big piece of the arts policy pie. Certainly, nonprofits can raise money in a way that municipalities generally don't. Of course, they can accept donations, but most people aren't getting in line to, you know, make a tax-deductible donation to your city. But also, there's, you know, a little more, I think, flexibility and kind of ability to focus on what we do as a nonprofit, and we can really, you know, articulate a mission, I think, that adds to what the city of Fort Worth is doing, which is helpful. But we do struggle not being a part of the city because you have to navigate partnering with the city, which is challenging. It's multiple departments that we kind of have to liaise with. Things change, and, you know, we're usually at the end of the communication chain after things get communicated internally, then it gets to the external partner. So it does slow things down. It does complicate things, and without good guidance, which we have recently had some great guidance from some city staff. But, you know, things change, and if that city staff member is trying to get caught up, then we're waiting for them to get caught up. And ultimately, having a city department, a city liaison, something, at least when I talk with my peers, it seems that some of the challenges we face are eased in those configurations. And,
I think with any organization, if there's not somebody championing it
Mm-hmm.
and passionate about it, it makes for a challenge to
Absolutely.
get things done. And
Yeah.
I think that the city is not any different in that arena. That things do change. Sometimes departments get moved and people move from places that they weren't. And, you know, I just was at a young leadership summit for the city of Fort Worth. It was all young leaders, employees at the city who are learning to be better leaders. And part of that discussion was those silos that are within the city and how that makes it challenging, even communicating amongst departments that are in the city.
Yeah.
So that one step removed of being an organization that partners with the city from the outside, all of those are things that I think the city continues to work on and try to improve.
Yeah.
But could see it as being challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, as far as what I hope for, I mean, I do think there's so much opportunity to do more and think more, you know, creatively about what we do in the city. And it's not just more dollars, although, of course, there are other funding sources that could be tapped to support this type of work that aren't being explored right now, I don't think.
I know what those are because
Yeah.
I bring them up on the regular. You don't have to say that. I've suggested that the city need to look at the hotel occupancy tax. That's something that they have tied up in a lot of other projects right now. So there wouldn't probably be those dollars available in the near term. But there's been some discussion about the belief about whether that's even an option, like legally. And I think other communities do it. So I think it legally is an option. So that's something I've brought up. You don't have to fight that battle. I'll continue to fight that battle.
Yeah, well, and that's a big part of it too. Is just having a community that is willing to speak up for these things and explore the solutions and go to council or go to the city and ask for something a little bit different. Because at the end of the day, my job is to administer the things that the city's in contract with us to administer, and to explore, what we can do to uplift the community outside of that as a nonprofit. But really, it all comes down to who's on the ground, who's seeing the gaps, and who's going to get together and ask, for a solution. Because it's not just, like I said, not just dollars. Americans for the Arts right now, I was, working with them just recently. And it's at the federal level, policy decisions including, do arts nonprofits get to access small business administration grants the way that a small business does? And the answer is they should. In the pandemic, they did, and the outcome was fantastic. Do independent performers get to itemize their expenses for headshots and voice lessons? Well, I think they should. Other businesses allow that sort of thing. So there are policy decisions that don't really cost that much money on the front end and, cost almost nothing on the back end, that sometimes just don't get talked about or don't get brought to the right people. And that's a big part of it too, is in the city of Fort Worth, what are those decisions? What are those things? Of course, they're tangential with so many other things, right? We talk about transportation, affordable housing that impact creatives and people working in these industries. And what are the solutions we can all work together to find? I think for me, that's something that energizes me to lean into, and I think that's a big part of the next step for us here.
Yeah. Here's a thought. So you mentioned, community support. Mm-hmm. What, let's say a hotel tax kind of thing for the arts was even possible on the docket. Do you even think that's something Fort Worth would vote in, as a city?
That's a good question.
I think that that there's a lot of times the community is really anxious to jump in when they see something that they need to fight to stop. Mm-hmm. And they're not as anxious to jump in and be advocates for and do the fight for things to make things happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where they get tired of constantly feeling like they have to fight against things. And so when you ask them to come and be an advocate and an ally for something, I think that gets notched down on there. But if you do that, then maybe you don't have to end up in those battles.
Yeah,
that sounds good
in
to
the
me.
Future.
Yeah.
So I think that if people knew that you could put funding that is brought in and paid for by people who don't live in this community. So hotel occupancy tax is taxes paid by, unless you're doing a staycation and staying in a hotel locally here, it's tax dollars brought in by folks outside the community. And then it can be spent on things that benefit the community. Mm-hmm. So when I served on the Visit Fort Worth board, there was a lot of talk about tourism and what we did as an organization to attract tourists and people to the city. And I was always the one saying, yes, and how can this benefit the people who are already here? Mm-hmm. And how can this be, good for the folks that live here already? And I think that's what using those kind of dollars could be for. And so you're just educating people as to the benefit of it, and then allowing them an easy way to opt in. I think that when you ask somebody to go and talk to their elected official or go and talk to locally or at the state level or wherever, if you give them a form and a description of what it is that you're trying to get done, and you just allow them to punch a couple buttons, make it as easy as possible, I think that's one way to get people to be supportive of these things.
Yeah, because I think you'll find a lot of people love this stuff. A lot of people want this stuff, and if they can understand that it really doesn't cost them anything more, or, if it does cost them a little bit more, they're not even going to notice it.
And a lot of times when they go to other communities and they see it really robustly done, they come back and go, why don't we have this in Fort Worth? And so I think that that's part of the conversation too. You got to explain why you don't have it here.
Well, it feels like I feel like Fort Worth has a bunch of nonprofits who then works with the city, because our city doesn't have a budget to act like a really big city. So then a bunch of nonprofits are near South Side, Visit Fort Worth, whatever the case, has to be created because we're an underfunded city compared to other larger metro areas who then gets all these things.
Yeah, I mean, I have thoughts on that too, because there's literally things that other cities prioritize and fund. And Fort Worth has traditionally been a city that wants to keep a very lean budget and wants to pay for the nuts and bolts of a thing that the city delivers. And we've had elected officials who have thought we should be paying for public safety and pipes in the ground and getting your trash picked up and, you know, that bare bones government. And there are other people that see the value and, you know, these studies that Arts Fort Worth has done that show the value of supporting these other things that might actually make some of those other things that we do end up paying for cheaper. So if you're, or not as expensive, if you're funding the arts and people, and it touches on health and wellness, then you might end up with less concerns and needs on that public safety end because, or the affordable housing end, because people are able to make a living and have that kind of support.
Yeah.
So I think that's,
And the big power here is everything's, and you know, we talked about tourism. That's a form of art, like that. You know, in my opinion, you got entrepreneurship's a form of art and creativity. Like art is literally the spark to all the innovation that they do care about, or you know, economic growth has to come from being inspired.
Yeah.
And that starts at the seed of art. So just it's interesting. How do you feel the average local artist in Fort Worth feels supported in the city? Are they like, this place is great? Or are they like, man, you know, we're grassrooting our own campaigns to tell them they need to get their stuff together?
Yeah. So the Arts Center, I think this year we clocked in a little over 3,000 independent artists that we're working with. Wow. It's a fantastic number. Yeah. And I think you'd probably get, 3,000 answers to that question.
No, there's a lot of passionate artists, which is why, I think about the amount of texts or calls, or I'll just meet someone in a coffee shop and I'm like, whoa, this person's really passionate about art in Fort Worth, but all for very different reasons and angles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
it's a diverse community.
Yeah.
And they have diverse opinions.
Yeah.
I think, like the city's libraries, did this partnership on music and the Amplify 817. And I think that there's a lot of support happened in that. So when you point to individual things and the people who are touched by those things, they would probably say, this has been fantastic.
Yeah.
And then there's others where things have struggled, like being able to find studio space and being able to afford to live in the communities that have kind of bubbled up organically to become artsy places with creatives, and then it gets to a point where a lot of people want to be there and it's harder to afford to live there. And if they had kind of warehousey space that they were being able to do their art in, and then that space got redeveloped to something else. So there has to be intentionality about making sure that you don't make a place that was created by those creatives unattainable to them. So your job is not just, and all of our jobs, if we support the arts, is not just to make sure that the arts are supported. It's supporting the arts on so many different levels.
Yeah, that ecosystem or that environment. And I think, you mentioned earlier the Fort Worth Community Arts Center and kind of how its future is, something we're still trying to understand. I think where a lot of the fear about that future is coming from is kind of what you just described, is so often artists, especially individual artists, especially, frankly, visual artists, get a good thing going on in a space that's affordable, make it really desirable because of the cool things they're doing, the cutting edge things they're doing. They get displaced. And it's a recurring thing. I mean, even in good deals where we've got a really cool thing happening over with Art Space 111. They've got some studio spaces across the street. I think it was the former Girls Inc. building. Yeah. Developer there has given them kind of a window of time to use that as our studio space. But it's temporary. It's not going to be a permanent thing. There aren't that many permanent, I'm using air quotes here on a podcast, permanent spaces where artists, where creatives, where performers can go to work on their craft or to showcase what they're doing. And I think what a lot of people are afraid of now with the Art Center is that they're going to lose those 7 galleries where they're showing, and not just on the walls, but every square inch of those galleries is showing artists in our community trying something new, doing something that may not make it to a commercial gallery, at least in its current state. And I think that's a big part of it, is where's the kind of, promise of these things that artists need to thrive and in turn give back to our community and uplift our community. And I think a lot of them feel at this moment that there isn't a lot of that promise. I don't think that may be the way people feel a year from now, 2 years from now. Part of my job and our job is to change that trajectory if we can. But I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think I think we're kind of on the cutting edge of tipping into being more supportive in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always the hopeful optimist. So, I turn my losses into wins on this podcast all the time. Or like, if this happens, then this could be a win. But I think it's really important to keep talking about it so that we're not having to just wait until there's something really threatening right at our doorstep. But proactively continuing to have the conversations and convince the people that are making the policy decisions.
Yeah. You were talking about we were talking about Arts Goggle, and then just hearing you guys talk about the arts and the impact the pandemic had on it.
Yeah.
What do you think the pandemic had an impact on art in the sense of how art is expressed? Like in the sense of like now I think about all the booths that were there, and we were talking about there was like a lot of anime, there's a lot of pop culture. And it just made me think about what was the influence of you're stuck in your house for, a year or two, had on how you decide on what you paint or express or configure. What is the overall synopsis of like what you think the impact of pandemic had on how we move as artists?
Yeah. Well, I think it's not just even what you decide to, depict or use as your medium, but like deciding to make art. A lot of people did something for the first time because they were, at home. They needed a way to release kind of whatever was going on inside, or just to distract themselves from what was going on outside. So a lot of people became artists in a way that they didn't, realize they were, which is super cool. And I think the democratization of art has been something we've seen a lot with technology, and then the pandemic sort of accelerated that. And that is, in my opinion, absolutely a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen concurrently with that is a lot of these institutions, of course, struggling because their business models were just completely thrown upside down by the pandemic. And now we're in this interesting place where we've got a lot of people who now have a very personal connection to the arts and a lot of places that can provide a way to exercise that connection that are struggling, right? So they're trying to figure out how to engage this new audience. They're trying to figure out how to just keep the lights on. And it's kind of an interesting time. I mean, I don't quite have the answers. I don't think anyone has the answers yet. But there's clearly a lot of opportunity, right? There's a lot of opportunity for people to dig deeper into these expressions they've discovered. And there's a lot of opportunity for these institutions to reimagine what they're doing to bridge that gap. It's hard to change, though, right?
Yeah.
So we're kind of in a moment of flux, and it's going to be interesting to see where it all goes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had another example of something that happened after Arts Goggle last night. A friend of mine, she commissioned an artist that's a friend of hers to paint a mural on the side of her garage in her backyard to beautify like what she sees when she's sitting out in her backyard, which she's done a great job of making a really cool place to hang out. But that garage wall was, just an eyesore. And so she had this artist come and paint this beautiful mural that has all the birds that live in her backyard on it and things that, native birds. And she was talking about how certain birds don't like each other and they fight in the yard. And she's got this gorgeous mural. And I thought, I might need a mural on my garage. I've got a same blank wall down my garage facing my backyard too. So there's a lot of opportunities for individuals to support artists as well.
Yeah, you said use the word commission, right? Like they paid an
artist. Oh yeah, she paid him.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that's fantastic. Do you know how they got connected with that artist? Was it a personal connection?
Yes, because he was an art teacher in the school that she teaches English at. So I think he's moved on from that role, but she describes him as the best art teacher they've ever had. So I think that she would like to lure him back to teaching as well, but. I think he's working. He might be at TCU now. I think he's doing some graduate work at TCU.
Oh, very cool.
Well, we're 40-ish minutes in. Is there anything we didn't ask you or talk about that you feel like we should highlight?
My whole kind of leave behind here, and I will leave with you the Arts and Economic Impact, Arts and Economic Prosperity 6th. This is the 6th edition of the study. Kind of a one-pager you can, add to your website. And we'll be pushing those numbers to our supporters and out to the public over the next couple weeks. But definitely want to encourage people to drop by www.artsfortworth.org. It's our website. It's a great resource for what's happening at the Fort Worth Community Arts Center and in general what's going on around the arts in our community. And also just to follow us at Arts Fort Worth at Instagram, Facebook. We try to stay active there. And that's really it. I mean, we need people to engage with us and to let us know what they're looking for, what they're experiencing, and to be a part of this, I think, growing movement in Fort Worth of people who really do want to not only support and strengthen what we already have, but welcome in and bring in maybe what we're missing or what's asking for a seat at the table. And yeah, so if anyone listening to this is interested, reach out to us. You can use the website. You can email talkto@artsfortworth, or you can DM us. And we'd love to get a relationship going and keep you all up to date on what's happening in our community.
All right, so there was Wesley. I can tell you guys were friends. I was kind of jealous how friends. I was like, man, y'all really go back.
Well, and you kind of gave me a little bit of grief about not asking enough questions and just like chiming in like I'm a guest too. So I think I'm going to have to make some note of that.
Arts is a big part of your platform when you ran. So, I felt like you had a lot of knowledge. And what I do admire about, I do get asked, how cool is it to hang out with Ann every week? And I'm like, she really does care about transportation and art and everything like she does. Like, it is not just a, person going up to say some stuff. You genuinely do care about the things you fight for. So you could just see it. And so I was trying to throw some zingers in the Wesley because I know it has to be tough being in that role, dealing with, Fort Worth way kind of stuff around arts and investing, plus the diversity of our art spaces and people and communities, having to navigate both, getting the Fort Worth way to understand what's going on the grassroots level, but then the grassroots level, people seeing that the work you're doing matters. So, but yeah, he has, yeah. So, well, let's go ahead and dive into wins and losses. Let's start with losses so we can end on a high note. What was your loss? And this, you wanted to make a short story, but I was like, Ann, if we made this a short story, everyone will know what we're going to say. But it is, I'm proud that I found this article and shared it with you. But go ahead and lead us to your loss.
So there's a very lengthy article in the Star-Telegram titled "Toll Lanes Don't Speed Traffic at Fort Worth Spot." And I read the whole thing, and basically what it comes down to is continuing along the narrative and the idea and the planning and the spending money to fix congestion by adding lanes. And in this one, they describe the fact that in some places they've added toll lanes along with free lanes, and that those toll lanes are supposed to provide a faster trip if you pay the money. And they're not always doing that because of the configuration of the frontage roads and where different highways come together. There's slowdown regardless and then they have a fix, quote unquote, but it's not going to be delivered until sometime down the road. And then they talk about the fact that they're going to add more lanes in different places and that's going to alleviate the problem, and that the thing is we need to be doing this regionally, when it really all comes down to, which I believe is a fact, that adding lanes does not relieve congestion. It just induces more people to drive. And so, as they point out, we are a fast-growing place with lots of people moving here. And if we continue to think that we're just going to add lanes in order to alleviate congestion, we're just going to end up back where we are right now, with these choke points being at different locations, because these lanes will just fill up with more people driving cars.
Yeah, and especially, if anyone's really serious about that, like, we're going to be the number 1, 2, and 3 metro in the country with like 30 million people in 2100. If that's ever going to be true, name a 30 million people city that doesn't have high, well done transportation. They all do, because that's the only way you do it. Actually, the cars are like not there. So that needs to be there. But what would be cool? Obviously, this will never happen, but TxDOT should have to give you your money back if you don't get there in time. And
Well,
so,
TxDOT doesn't run those toll lanes, so it would
Oh,
be
sorry,
the entities that run the toll lanes
Yes.
that you would be asking to give your money back.
well, those people, they had to get their money back. And then to me, if I was those people, I would support public trans because then it gets people off my road. So then I actually don't have to do
You know what
refunds.
is funny? Our Trinity Metro actually is providing you get your money back if we don't get you to a certain place on time.
See?
And so our public transportation system is addressing a concern of them not performing what they say they're going to perform. So I agree.
This is exactly an example of where we hyper keep our government and our nonprofit organizations hyper accountable, but our for-profit organizations can just willy away and do whatever and not have to give us our money back when we don't get there in time. But then I would feel like those people would support transportation because then it's an affordable way for them to meet the demand of not having to do refunds to people because you're getting people on the road to where they want to go.
Yeah.
So,
So if you make some of those managed lanes, bus only lanes, rapid transit lanes, these are ways that you can move more people on those lanes and not have them all in individual cars.
And I wonder why can't since it's not TxDOT, I got to always remember that. I wonder, could there not be a contract with the city that if this for-profit road allows the city to just make it a bus lane, that they get revenue
I think
from the
what
bus
is
pass
pointed
or
out
something?
in this article is the complication of having all these different entities being in charge of all these different elements, and the fact that nobody is the boss of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so it literally requires a collaboration. There are some communities, like in Nashville, the county and the city have a governing body that is together. So they have an organization that has 30 electeds on it, and it's a combination of county and city, and they meet together, they work together. In Tarrant County and in Fort Worth, we try to collaborate and work together, but nobody's required to.
Yeah.
And the Council of Governments tries to do that, and the Regional Transportation Council tries to do that, but nobody is everybody's boss. And so it is people have to opt in and be agreeable. And when not everybody agrees to what the answer is,
Feels a little Wild Wild West. Yeah. Well, my loss going into yours was transportation. Mine was climate. In the Dallas Morning News, in the Metro section of the newspaper, I'm going to make that newspaper noise for you so you can hear it. It says businesses feels the heat. Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas said temperatures reduced GDP by as much as $24 billion this summer. The historic temperatures this summer tested Texas economy. They say that with the temperatures lingering in the triple digits, some companies had harder time supplying goods and consumers spent less. So I just think when you think about small businesses, when you think about, imagine if Arts Goggle was a month earlier and it's still hot. It's just all these different things. You have less chances to do even Arts Goggles things because a quarter of our year we're not even able to go outside. And I think people like my friends who have young kids, they just talk about how it's just hard to find things to do that doesn't cost money, or it's not a bar or not a restaurant that's
monetized.
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
a public place that's accessible to everybody without it monetizing in some way.
Yeah, so it's just I think just the heat is a loss over. I'm glad we're out of it. That's a win. But the fact that you can see it in our numbers that climate change or the heat situation and weather is not just something people talk about. It actually goes back to economic gains and prosperity.
It was 90 degrees yesterday on October 21st.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
So
it was a little more
little
toasty.
warm.
Yeah. It was. So, Ann, what is your win?
So my win, I hope this isn't too self-serving, but the Fort Worth Report reached out to me to participate in the Where I Live series, and that article was published this morning, I believe. So I was able to write a story about where I live, find out what makes Bluebonnet Hills a perfect home for this urban planner, is what they titled it. There's a lovely picture of my husband and myself. It's a selfie in my backyard. But it illustrates one of the reasons why we chose our neighborhood that I touch on in the story. And that is a neighborhood with unique and interesting homes, and then and different from each other, and mature trees. And the funny thing is, though, that tree behind us We planted that in our backyard when we redid our backyard when we moved in. So there is a mature tree in my backyard that we planted. And there's a mature tree in our front yard that we planted as well. So that whole idea about planting trees that you'll never be able to enjoy the shade of is something that you give to the future. We've planted trees that we're enjoying the shade of now.
And that's like real messaging for all policy and investing, not just planting trees. That was a good one there. Yeah. But yeah, well written. Got to see it. I saw it last night. So even before you sent it. So
thank you.
They sent it out last night. And that will be in the show notes. And we'll go from there. My win, I'm going to keep it simple. It was Arts Goggle. Again, one of the best times of the year in Fort Worth. And tens of thousands of people there. Tons of different artists. Tons of different food. Bands. Near Southside did a great job. Visit Fort Worth Partnership was a great job. It was
Trinity
well
Metro
done.
was the sponsor.
Yes. Because I went with my in-laws and my wife. But getting there wasn't bad at all. They went twice, and they said when we got there at 12 when I went, they went again at like 6, 7.
And I was planning to try to go back too, but after volunteering in the morning, going in the afternoon, going to another thing after that, I just could not bring myself to go back. I'm a little sore today. My legs are kind of sore.
Yeah, but we did see the city had like a little exhibit section.
Yes.
And I have a funny story there. I was walking by, and I'm like hat, glasses, like I don't like, I'm just trying to, look at the art, bam, bam, bam. And the lady's like, hey, what do you, we're a part of the city. What do you want more from Fort Worth? Like, what do you want more of? And I didn't have anything to think of. So I was like, oh, let me circle around and come back to you. But my father-in-law, who's like this hippie white guy, and he's really into raves, he says, we need more raving to the city official. And I was just like,
She's like, did you say raving?
Yeah. He's like, he goes, I have to go to Dallas for that stuff, but you had the UBW festival, and that was really cool. Like, we need more of that. So I thought that was funny because she probably would never expect someone from his age demographic to say that. Yeah. And him being like, that'd be funny if it makes the drawing board. So
I saw both. The city had 2 booths at Arts Goggle, right in the same location at Magnolia and Hemp Hill. One of them was the comp plan, which that's like their first engagement on getting some ideas from folks. They had the information both in Spanish and English. I thought it was a really good kickoff to that effort. They're going to start doing some more robust engagement after the first of the year. And then there was also a table from the Parks Department because they're in the process of doing a park plan as well. And so there's going to be some serious opportunities for folks to be engaged and have their voices heard. And I think that these 2 efforts are really showing a concerted effort by the city to actually do that engagement piece in a really good way. So I'm excited.
Awesome. All right, beautiful people. Well, we will see you next week for the 817 podcast. We have a guest scheduled for that week as well, another one I'm excited for. But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts about the arts, and make sure you go and support Arts Fort Worth.
Follow us like double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us like double tap. Now they control your life.